Let's talk about AI therapy. The sample student essay, I'm not suggesting you need therapy. I wouldn't do that. I might need therapy. Huh. It's time for another sample student paper, our chance to be very horrible to a writer who we don't know. But hey, it's for a good cause, right? It helps us figure out stuff. And that's what we're here for. The paper AI Therapy, I actually think that the argument they're making here is relatively solid. I walk out of this paper and I buy it. I think that there are some problems with AI being used for therapy, and that is the goal here, right? To convince us of the argument. The paper as a whole, I'm going to probably rate somewhere in the good range. It's not excellent. It could probably be made to be excellent if we hit the right areas. If we polish the right things, we can make this paper nice and shiny. So what do we fix and how do we fix it? That's going to be what we're going to talk about. There are some nitpicky things that need to be addressed in this paper. It wouldn't take us too long to fix, say, the citations, which are closer to some weird version of APA than they are MLA, and it wouldn't take us too long to fix the citations. Basic formatting, that's easy stuff. I'm a little bit skeptical of BetterHelp as a source. I don't really think that's scholarly, but there are worse problems that you could have here. The major things that this paper needs to have addressed are its uses of subjectivity and some issues in organization. So we're going to cover those two in a little bit of depth. In terms of subjectivity, when I say subjectivity, I'm talking about what is the subject? The subject is the noun that is doing or being something. In an academic paper, this is really important because you need to know what's being analyzed. For this paper, the first place I see subjectivity issues is with passive verbs. Yeah, I know writing teachers love to knock on passive verbs, but it's kind of important because who's performing the action is something we need to know. This shows up right at the beginning of the paper, right in the introduction. Look at how this thing starts. Mental health is constantly evolving. Kind of generic, but let's go with it. Then we have the method by which patients are being treated. Are being treated? By whom? The new mental conditions that are being discovered, again, by whom? And medications that are being created, by whom, are just a few different examples of this. But there is now a new way in which patients are being seen and consulted with, by whom, which is AI therapy visits. We get the AI eventually, but we shouldn't have to hunt for the subject. When we have to hunt for the subject, it becomes kind of obscured, and that kind of screws our whole argument up because we're missing the key data. The subject is really important to papers. And the place where the subject becomes the most obvious thing is in the thesis statement. It should be right at the beginning of the thesis statement. So let's look at that thesis statement. AI therapy visits pose significant risks to the future of mental health by decreasing the human touch in patient care, increasing the margins of error for diagnoses, and exposing patients to potential privacy leaks. Now, this is constructed well as a thesis. It follows the formula the way it needs to go. The problem I have here is AI therapy as the subject of analysis, because this sets out a very broad subject. We're covering every example of AI theory. And when readers get to deal with large subjects like this, it's harder for them to focus on them. Readers tend not to like numerous large subjects because they have a hard time picturing them. A singular subject, a more specific subject, we can see it in our mind's eye. And if we can see it in our mind's eye, it becomes more real to us. And as a result, the whole argument becomes more real to us. This whole general versus specific thing shows up in other places too. Let's look at this paragraph. The one that starts, believe it or not, therapy has roughly been around for the last 300 years. We'll talk about the thesis later, but I want to focus on this phrase. This is dangerous, for anybody can find out a person's darkest secrets with a click of a button. Now, granted, this isn't as important as in the thesis statement, but there's still this weird word here. Anybody. Anybody? Are we worried about grandmothers finding people's secrets with a click of a button? Your grandmother might be very tech savvy, but we're going by stereotypes here. Or are we more worried about specific groups of people finding your information? Who really holds our attention here as a subject? Everybody encompasses a large range of people. If we point towards specific subjects, we're going to come up with a more specific argument. Even smaller parts of the claim, if you get specific, then readers can picture them. Let's shift a while and look for another example of where subjectivity becomes a bit of an issue. The paragraph that starts as mental health issues are gaining awareness, more money is being put into treatments. Yeah, there's passive verbs there, but let's not deal with that so much. This is a larger issue in terms of structure of the paragraph that really highlights some issues with subjectivity, because you can divide this in half. The top half of this is about organizational funding. It talks about the expected growth of the market. The second half of it is more about individual user access. There's a shift here. Now, because this paragraph shifts topics, it really probably should be divided into two. If you divide this into two, you have more opportunities to explicitly draw out those connections, and that helps the reader explicitly see how your argument is developing. This is a matter of subjectivity because those two parts were different subjects, and if you can draw the connections between them in a clear and explicit way, readers will be able to follow the argument a bit more. Listen, focus is tremendously important to academic writing and to any type of writing. If you are able to maintain your readers' focus exactly where you need them to be, you can keep them going right in line. You can keep them on the path you want to go. And if you can keep them on your path, you can walk them through your argument. Don't give them chances to wander off. Because when there isn't a clear path or there's chances for readers to get distracted, things turn into chaos. And if your paper is chaotic, if the argument is chaotic, are you really going to be able to convince them of your argument? It's doubtful. This is blurring into other issues this paper has in terms of organization. The ability to move from point to point to point to clearly map out your path, yeah, it's a subjectivity issue, but it's an issue that has other implications. One of the places where I see organizational issues pop up in this essay are in some of the topic sentences. The topic sentence really should be the thing that highlights exactly what this paragraph is doing in terms of the argument. It should be clear when I look at a paragraph right at the beginning, what's going on here and how does this work to further the mission of this paper? And that way, they're kind of like signposts. You are here in the argument. If you don't have that, it gets more complex for the reader to figure out what's going on. Take this topic sentence. The idea of a computer diagnosing mental health problems sounds good on paper, but what happens when a patient cannot describe everything that is going on in black and white? First off, if you're trying to tell me what role this paragraph does in supporting the argument, don't give me a rhetorical question, because what a rhetorical question does is it changes where the burden of evidence is from the author to the reader. The reader is not reading it so they can figure out issues of their own, and you can't assume as an author that the reader should be the one to connect the dots. That's your job. It becomes a bit more difficult when we look at how paragraphs are put together. Let's look at this paragraph. Topic sentence. Where is it? First sentence, believe it or not, therapy has roughly been around for the last 300 years. What this sets the reader up for is history. We're going to learn all about the history of therapy. But the next sentence, since then, it has significantly changed in the way that patients are treated. What relation does this have to history? Well, this paragraph would have to spell it out. And there's only one sentence that starts to address this afterwards before the paragraph moves on. And basically it's I don't know, this is probably something that's important, but... And then you move on to what's probably the closest thing to a topic sentence in this paragraph. One of the major issues with having mental health problems vocalized into a chatbot is the chance of having privacy breaches. The rest of the paragraph is talking about this. but you go from history to it's changed a lot before you get to the actual thesis, and it makes you seem like you're just jumping from different point to different point. It's very confusing for the reader when they have to do that much work to try to figure out where the argument's going, and it's easy for them to get lost. Another example of this. Many people turn to chatbots for a diagnosis. A straightforward label like anxiety, depression, PTSD, etc. is a lot easier to put in perspective than a jumble of symptoms with no true reason. This is where computers can go wrong. It can misinterpret symptoms or piece them together without truly knowing the cause. Again, we have this topic sentence that's crammed right in the middle of the paragraph. Moreover, doing a particularly good job of setting up specifically what this paragraph is doing in the larger argument because it uses words like can, might, could possibly, maybe kinda. You want your language, and particularly when you're spelling out what your argument is, to be concrete. Abstract doesn't do it as well. Another organizational mantra is that like stuff should go with like stuff. If you have 2 points that are talking about the same thing, one developing the other, they should probably be close together. This is an issue in this paper because on page 3 we have AI therapists have a chance to make a patient's mental problems far worse than they already are. And this is talking about the lack of accountability and the dangers resulting from that if you use AI for therapy. It's a subject that this paper likes, and it's good because it does support their argument, but it comes back to it on page 6. Another problem with the use of AI in place of therapists and psychologists is a lack of accountability. Why is there this much space between these 2 paragraphs? Why the break? It's a puzzler because it makes the reader try to remember what they talked about earlier instead of just shoving it together where it should be to begin with. It's harder to see the development from thought to thought if there's so much stuff in between them. And if it was the only instance of this happening, it would be a little bit more understandable, but on page 4 we have a paragraph talking about bias, particularly ethnic bias. It's a subject that, again, works in favor of the argument, and the paper does come back to it, but all the way on page 7, when they start talking about ethnically diverse populations and how AI therapy fails to meet their needs. Again, why is there this much space between these 2 points? It does kind of destroy the continuity, and it's something that happens again, because there's this paragraph about the efficiency of AI, particularly in terms of people being able to save lots of time and money using AI therapists, financial issues. And it's a subject the paper, again, comes back to, but all the way on page 8. When it talks about if chatbots continue to rise in popularity due to low costs, it's a development of the thought. So why is there this much space between it? I don't know. But it does mean for a reader, it's a lot more difficult to travel from point to point. If there's a good argument in there and the reader has to work extraordinarily hard to draw the connections, it's going to really alter the chances of success. And that's important if you're trying to prove an argument. I want to once again remind you that this is actually a pretty good paper in spite of all the I just put on it. When I do these sample student essays, I don't feel the need to hold back. This is a good paper, but it could be made great, and sometimes thinking about the difference between good and great requires you to really get into the paper, rip it apart, and see what works and what doesn't. This makes good argumentative points. It could just be a lot more certain about its subjectivity, and it could be a lot more definite with its organization, and those things would have gone a long way to booting this paper up into the level of it. And that's what we all want, right? Just remember, all of these details matter because they're about the argument. And there's a good argument here, but you don't want any of this stuff holding your great argument back, do you? I wouldn't. See you in the next video.